Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. Let's go ahead and address the abnormally large snail in the room. The giant African snails are back. But let me assure you, we will eradicate these snails. We have done it twice before, and we will do it again. It's not a question of if, it's just when. That is why that we are doing this here today and why this is so important. How we were able to successfully eradicate these pests in the past is by working closely with the impacted communities, local officials, and the media to raise awareness about the snails and our treatment program. It's also how we tried to help prevent future introductions of these invasive pests into our environment by letting everyone know that it is illegal to import or possess giant African land snails in the United States without a permit. So why are these giant African snails, or like what we like to call them, gals, such a big deal? Because they are one of the most damaging snails in the world and consume at least 500 different types of plants, making them a clear threat to our agricultural and natural areas. Agriculture is the backbone of Florida's economy, and it is important to protect the vital industry from invasive pests like gals that are recklessly brought into our state by illegal pet traders or other illegal means. Gals are dangerous to our health because they carry parasites called rat lungworm, which is also called meningitis in humans. Today, we will be hearing from some of my department's experts on invasive pests and eradication. But first, I would like to stress at this very moment how dangerous these creatures are. Please, do not attempt to handle them yourself. Let's leave this to the professionals, including our four-legged detector dogs that we have here today. If you see a snail and you believe it to be a giant African snail, please contact our Division of Plant Industry Helpline at 1-888-397-1517. Again, that is 1-888-397-1517. Now, I'd like to introduce our Division of Plant Industry Assistant Director, Dr. Greg Hodges, to talk more about gals and the current quarantine process.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we are here today to talk about the recent detection of gals in Newport, Ritchie, and Pasco County. As the commissioner mentioned, this marks the third time that this exotic snail has been introduced into Florida. The first time was in the late 1960s and resulted in a successful eradication program that took about 7 years and resulted in 17,000 snails being collected at a cost of $1 million. The second time was in 2010, and it also resulted in a successful eradication program that took 10 years. And at almost 170,000 snails being collected at a cost of $23 million. Much like the most recent eradication effort in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, this detection was a result of a homeowner noticing several unusual large snails on their property. They reported it to the University of Florida Extension Service and Master Gardener Program, and the University of Florida noted that this looked to be a snail of concern. And they immediately shared this information with us. We identified the snail as gals and dispatched a team to start surveying that area immediately. We also sent samples to our partners, the USDA, APHIS, for confirmation of our identification, and that has been confirmed. One thing to note about this particular detection, this population has a very light cream-colored body with a typical dark and mottled brown shell. The populations that we dealt with in the previous two eradications had dark gray to brown bodies. This cream-colored phenotype is very common in the pet trade in Europe and has been intercepted here in Florida previously with the illegal pet trade. Remember, as the commissioner said, it is illegal to possess this species of snail in the United States. Gals is known, as she indicated, to feed on more than 500 plant species, which makes it a significant threat to our agricultural products here in the state. If it were to become established, it could result in a significant reduced crop yields for many of our crops, as well as the potential of international trade implications. Additionally, it can feed on plaster and stucco associated with houses in order to gain calcium for shell hardening. It also is a known carrier of the rat lungworm, a parasite known to cause a type of meningitis in both humans and animals. The process of eradication has begun. Just as the commissioner indicated, we will be successful, but it will take some time. Successful eradication can be declared 2 years after the last detection of a live snail and after we have completed the appropriate controls and detection methodologies to ensure that we have indeed eradicated the population. So far today, we have collected a little over 1,000 snails in our core area, with 29 properties being positive. We have 30 personnel currently assigned to the program, and our teams are even today conducting detection through inspection of yards. They're hand collecting snails when they see them, and we've started our treatment program with the appropriate chemistries. We've enacted a quarantine around the area of detection. The quarantine prohibits the movement of the giant African land snail or any regulated article, such as, but not limited to, plants, plant parts, soil, plants and soil, yard waste and debris, and compost. From within that quarantine area, unless you have a compliance agreement from us. To be successful going forward, we need a strong partnership, and we do have one, with the USDA, the University of Florida, the City of Newport Richey, the county, local businesses, and most importantly, the homeowners. We ask that anyone who thinks they have seen this exotic snail or any business that would need a compliance agreement, please contact our helpline. And I'll repeat that again. I know the commissioner just gave it to you, but 1-888-397-1517.
Thank you, Dr. Hodges, and for sharing that important information. Next, I'd like to introduce our Division of Plant Industry Deputy Director, Brian Benson, and his special canine guest, Sparky, and handler, Greg, to discuss the Detector Dog Inspection Program and how they are assisting in the eradication process.
Good afternoon. I'd like to touch on our Detector Dog Program. We have had this program with the Division of Plant Industry for over 10 years. We started it in 2012 with 4 canines that we have trained to work in parcel facilities to inspect male parcels that may be infested or have host material in them infested with plant pests. 2 years after we started our Detector Dog Program, we added 2 canines to the program in Miami-Dade that were specifically trained to target giant African land snails. Sparky here is one of our parcel dogs. The 2 canines that we have trained for giant African land snail are currently working on the program. And the canines are owned by the USDA. The state hires employees. Our handlers spend 12 weeks training in Noonan, Georgia at the USDA facility. At that time, they work with canines, and during that training, the canine decides which handler they would like. So the handlers don't choose the canines actually choose the handlers. All of the canines from the USDA facility are rescue animals. They tend to be lab breeds or a mix of a lab breed. So on the Giant African Land Snail Program in Pasco County, we conduct surveys based on where we find the snails. We bring in canines to follow up on the outskirts to determine properties to be negative following the detection and removal of snails, and the canines played a vital role in the eradication process and in us declaring eradication on previous programs. The canine's response is a passive response. For when we have canines surveying properties looking for the giant African land snail, their response is to sit if they alert and smell the odor of a giant African snail. We don't want the canines to put the snails in their mouth. This for the same reason we don't want humans picking them up. So there aren't vaccinations for the canines against meningitis, but we do take actions to prevent them from being exposed to the snails directly. And with that, I would say that the Division of Plant Industry has one of the most elite canine inspection teams in the United States, with the 2 canines that are specifically targeting mollusks. and our 4 canines that work in the parcel facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Sparky. It's really amazing what these dogs can handle, and the handlers that are working with us to help protect our state's agriculture industry and our communities. So as we wrap up, I'd like to take a moment to also thank our entire Division of Plant Industry team, not only for what they're doing now, but what they have been on the ground down in South Florida for the last of eradication of our giant African snails. Our program here in the state of Florida, as was just said, is one of the best, if not the best, in the entire country. And I have complete confidence that we are going to eradicate these snails once again. We are lucky to have this experienced team that is ready to prevent, detect, and treat these invasive threats. Your work is absolutely invaluable to our state, and I know that we are in great hands. Together, let's locate them, communicate, and eradicate so Florida can be gals free once again. So again, I want to talk to the people that are watching. Please, if you see one of these snails, do not touch it. Call us, make sure that you've got experts. They carry diseases like meningitis with them, and most importantly, do not eat them. This is not a snail to be put on butter and oil and garlic. This is not something that you want to touch, not something that you want to eat. This is left us up to the experts, but this is going to be something that we need the community's involvement in. We can only do our job if we've been alerted to finding these snails, so please make sure that you're vigilant, you're calling us immediately, and that we are able to get to the bottom of it. So now we will take some questions.
We know that the quarantine zone is in Pasco County where this eradication program is taking place, but one of my colleagues at News Channel 8 actually saw some of the snails in Pinellas County at Honeymoon Island. So that he didn't know what it was, but after seeing the reports and pictures, but we also are getting images and messages from viewers in Davenport as well as Haines City. Are you all aware that these snails are being spotted outside of Pasco County?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you so much. And you know, that's the reason why we do have the helpline. We want people to call the helpline and get it into our workflow. We'll have teams go out there and make sure. There are some other snails that maybe, depending on the size, it could be confused, and we want to make sure that it is actually the giant African snail. If it is, we will move in there immediately and start taking care of those too. But thank you so much for that tip, and yes, encourage your people to, again, just do like the commissioner said and call that number, and we'll follow up.
Yeah, so I think that it's more important to over communicate than under communicate. So if there is, again, that they may look like other types of snails that might not be as invasive. So that's really important that if you see something that you might think, call our hotline. That way we can have some of our team come out there, see it. And of course that if we find them outside of that zone, we of course will expand the zone to make sure that we're hitting every area.
Have any of the snails collected so far had rat lungworm?
That's a good question. Not out of this population. We have actually just started looking at that. Our lab's just set up this week on that. So at the moment, no.
Were those thousands of snails all found in the same quarantine area in Pasco County?
Yes, they were.
And over what time frame was that?
That would be pretty much all of last week. I'm looking at my teams. It would be from last week until today.
And what's the concern with more, since they do have both reproductive parts and can create more, what's the concern about them spreading, beyond that?
Well, the good thing is they move pretty slow. They need human help to move around in new areas, right? So whenever they mate, what they're going to do is they're going to lay those eggs in the soil. They're going to burrow down and lay those eggs. They'll take some time for incubation and hatch. And the best thing for us to make sure they're not moving is just what we're doing, detection. We're going to have teams out there going forward. And as those babies hatch and start to emerge up, we'll be out there to collect them. So that's why we don't want people moving potted plants from the core area or yard waste. We want to make sure that everything's appropriately dealt with so we don't move them to another area.
Those potted plants in yard waste, that's
Spanish, and then I will repeat it in English for my audience. So in Spanish first, okay? Comisionada, en el póster, mire el último, usted aparece un tire de Gauss Buster ciudad a la importancia de los contagios de meningitis. ¿Cómo le responde usted? I'm going to do it in English now. Commissioner, in the last post on Twitter, where you appear on a flyer
Yes.
with
Ghostbusters?
many criticized that post, saying that it takes seriously away from the infection, from the meningitis infection. What is your response to that?
First of all, thank you for asking that question. That's exactly why we put out the poster, because we do take this very seriously, and the fact that whatever it's going to take to bring attention to the situation, even if it has to be creative and outside the box, that's why we're doing this. And so we're going to be creative and getting that message out there, and the fact that you asked that question is exactly why we did that poster, to bring light to the seriousness of the situation and to make sure that people are aware of what's going on.
The yard waste and the potted plants in the quarantine, is that just for commercial providers or is that also residential?
No, we would actually want the residential too. So whenever if a resident in the core area has yard waste that needs to be removed, we want them to contact our team through the helpline, and we'll come over and make sure everything's appropriate, and we'll move it or allow them to move it.
And I noticed in here some of the snails that have been collected are alive. What happens with the live snails that are collected? Are they killed? Where do you take the snail carcasses? What's happening with them after you collect them?
Does
That's-
that include like a pest control or substance, poison?
Well, here's what we do. When we collect snails, our teams are out during the day, and they have buckets, and we collect the snails. We put them in a bucket, right? We bring them back to the office, and all those snails are going to be euthanized, and we're going to transport the dead snails back up to Gainesville, and we're storing them there because we might want to compare the population with previous populations through genetics, or just like we're doing the rat lungworm, we can do those dissections on the dead snails. So that's what we're going to do with them.
Once you guys do eradicate them again, is there anything people can do to ensure that they don't come back a third or fourth time?
You know, I think the biggest thing is, and we kind of touched on this a couple of times, and you guys have the handout, I think, right? You see the snail is quite attractive, and people like it in the pet trade, in particular in Europe, and people might like that here. People like unusual things, and what I would tell anybody is please research anything that you're looking to purchase as a pet and make sure it is legal and safe to have. The giant African snail is not legal to have in the state, so don't bring it in. That's the best thing. Just prevent it by keeping it out.
You mentioned that this particular phenotype is popular in the European pet trade. Is that how you believe it was introduced as a pet?
Like I said, I can't truly say that, but what I can say is here recently we have had interceptions in Florida that were tied to the illegal pet trade, and they did match the same color morph. So we've had some experience with them recently.
Are invasive animals becoming more of a problem in Florida? You know, a lot of us covered the Oriental fruit fly. We've obviously had problems with the iguana population. Is this becoming a bigger problem, you think, in the state?
You know, I joined the division in 2002, and when I first got here, the big invasive pest was pink hibiscus mealybug, and ever since that time, it seems to be one after another. And we kind of keep track of that with the insects and arthropods, and we get about 2.5 is what we average per month that we detect. So yes, I mean, you think about it. I mean, just like we're out here today, the sun is beautiful, and it's nice warm temperatures. We have a lot of lush green growth. Our winters are typically pretty mild, so it's pretty conducive for any pest that would come in might pose a problem for us. So yeah.
And this is also why, you know, we do huge inspections and working with the USDA on all the ports and what comes into our state, and why we are so aggressive on making sure that when we see an invasive pest coming into our state, same reason why we still have green algae, on our citrus trees. Because the fact of the matter is that this got brought into our state, and because agriculture is such a prominent part of our economics here in the state, it is so imperative that we get in front of these things immediately. Make sure we're letting the people know that what you think is a cool looking fruit that you're bringing in from an island can end up being something that takes over, like citrus greening here in the state. So this is something that we always want to get in front of. We have a tremendously large team that monitors this, an incredible partnership with the USDA because of the amount of ports that we have here, the amount of just international travel. So we are, very vigilant and make sure that we stay in front of this always immediately.
Commissioner, what are you kind of settling in for here? Looking back at the last eradication, I mean, 10 years, $23 million, those are some daunting time and monetary figures. What are we talking about here? Is this going to be a years-long effort in Pasco?
Look, that's going to be 10 on the public. It's completely in the public's hands to make sure that they're listening to our warnings, making sure that they are heeding caution to not move these outside the quarantine area, that as soon as you have found something or think that you have found something, that you're immediately contacting us. So our hope is obviously to do this as soon as possible, but as you heard, that it's a 2-year buffer from the last one that we find to be complete eradication. But we have tremendous support from the USDA, from the federal government, and we will do everything possible. We are hopeful that we're getting in front of this fast and making sure that the public is aware of this immediately, and that this is something that we're going to be able to not have to wait 10 years, but we will do whatever is necessary.
Do you guys have any idea how long they've been in the area with some of them being so big already?
Well, that's a good question, and we're trying to put a kind of a number on that right now. You know, the fact that we picked up 1,000, they've been there for a little while. And I think the biggest one we've picked up is 4.5 inches, so it's a pretty good sized snail. So at least a year and a half, I would wager.
How many inches did you say? Car came back.
4.5. 4.5 is the biggest one we picked up so far.
Okay.
Where's the location of where you're collecting the majority of these? Is there a specific street that you could pinpoint us to?
I actually, without me having a map in front of me, I visited the Corps, but I don't know the exact street.
Massachusetts Avenue, Massachusetts.
Oh, I think they mean where on the property.
Where on the property? What
I think we're looking for like a
general
street.
location. So
Street.
the
is it
street? The
Ma-
street
is it
address
Massachusetts?
location.
Massachusetts, that's the main street,
Yeah.
Massachusetts is the main street.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you for all you being here, because this truly is a partnership, and we need you all to continue to make sure this is getting out to the public, that this is a partnership. The only way that we're going to be able to get in front of this and continue to eradicate them is the consciousness of the people in the communities, and certainly the media helps with that, getting the messaging out. So thank you all for being here.